Welcome to Moonlight Love Chapters. We'd be thrilled if you could subscribe to our channel and leave a comment on this video. Thank you so much for your support. May the power of the werewolf be with you. The Witcher and Layna, Shadows of the Curse. Chapter 1, Sunset. The evening descended upon the world like a heavy silk, spreading across the land. The golden rays of the setting sun wrapped around the ancient treetops as the Witcher, Darien, arrived at the village of Silswood. It was an ordinary village, hiding itself from the bustling cities deep in the heart of the forests, where every morning began with harsh, unforgiving work that allowed no room for fatigue or weakness. Darien was accustomed to such places, villages where people had lost all hope of salvation and turned to him for help. The Witcher served as a guide between this world and the one hidden in its shadow. Sometimes, it meant simply slaying a monster, and other times, it meant saving souls tangled in magic and curses. But this time, he wasn't sure if his task would be that simple. He stood on a high hill overlooking Silswood. From here, he could see the houses tucked beneath green rooftops, with the faint shapes of the villagers moving about. They seemed tense, and that immediately caught Darien's attention. He was an experienced tracker, and he felt the unsettling energy that lingered in the air. Something wasn't right. The village was cloaked in darkness, and it was a palpable darkness, one that seeped into not just the trees and houses, but the very souls of its people. Someone or something was bringing fear and despair to this place. "Did you come?" A voice called from behind. Darien didn't turn around. He already knew who it was. A woman. Her footsteps could be heard several meters before she appeared before him, deliberate and confident. Layna, the village healer. "We have problems, Darien. Problems you don't understand. And you're not the only one who knows about them." Her eyes sparkled like stars, but there was no warmth or curiosity in them. That gaze, accustomed only to searching the dark corners of the world. "I've been wondering about that," the Witcher replied, not acknowledging her gaze. "But I don't like guessing." Layna ran a hand through her long, nearly black hair, as if brushing away non-existent dust. Her face remained calm, though something in the way she carried herself gave her away. She was trying to hide fear, and yet her silhouette seemed wrapped in shadow, a dim light fading into the night. "Then let's not waste time. You came here for a reason, didn't you?" She stepped forward. "You need to destroy him." It was foretold. But Darien couldn't understand what she was talking about. "Who?" he asked cautiously, stepping closer. "A werewolf." At these words, everything around him seemed to freeze. He noticed how her voice trembled, though she tried to conceal it. Her gaze became hazy, as if she were speaking of something foreign, beyond her understanding. "Do you mean a beast?" he clarified, trying to grasp her meaning. "It's not just a beast," she replied. "It's something ancient. It appears and disappears like a shadow. But its goal is always the same: death." Darien paused. Everything she was saying was tied to the foggy myths and legends. He knew werewolves were creatures not of this world, doomed to wear two faces, but for such a beast to come into a village. And even stranger was the fact that her eyes didn't hide the pain when she spoke. "Aren't you afraid?" he asked. "You're not just a healer." Layna didn't answer immediately. Instead, she looked toward the sunset, and once again, a shadow flickered in her gaze. "There's nothing to fear if you know how to act. But I fear what hides beneath his skin. He has a face, and it will look for me." There was more than mere anxiety in her words. There was something greater, a knowledge she didn't want to share. Darien felt her words slowly seep into his mind, making him think of possibilities, of things he hadn't expected from this mission. Darien remained silent, trying to catch every nuance of her behavior. She was hiding something. "And what am I supposed to do with this?" he asked. Destroy him? Layna didn't respond. She simply looked into his eyes. You're a hunter, Darian. Her voice became soft, almost intimate.
You know how to fight this.
But will you be ready to kill someone who wears a human face? In that moment, Darian realized he had found himself in the heart of a game where neither he nor she could emerge victorious. Chapter 2: Shadow in the Night. Nightfall covered the village of Silswood, and with it came fear. The moon rose slowly, as if reluctant, illuminating the dark rooftops and narrow streets. The air was thick with the scent of damp earth, smoke from fires, and something else, something heavier, spicier, the smell of blood. Darian walked down the main street, catching the wary glances of the locals. People here didn't trust witchers. To them, he was as much a spawn of darkness as those he killed. However, the fear of the werewolf was stronger than their prejudice. They didn't try to stop him, didn't hide their children or lock their doors. They were waiting. The witcher stopped at the tavern, the only place where light still flickered at this hour. The door creaked as he entered. Dim light, the smell of cheap ale, burnt meat, and sweat. Layna sat at one of the tables. She didn't look frightened, but there was something uneasy about her face. When the witcher entered, she raised her head, and their gazes met. Are you still here? Her voice was quiet, but there was no weakness in it. I rarely leave before finishing the job, he replied, sitting across from her. She leaned forward, her elbows resting on the table. In the dim light of the candles, her skin appeared porcelain, almost unreal. I spoke with an old woman. She says she saw the werewolf last night. It was hiding in the grove behind the mill. Saw it? The witcher frowned. Did it let her go alive? Layna slowly nodded. He could have killed her, but he didn't. Darian paused. Werewolves rarely left witnesses. If this one hadn't attacked, there must have been a reason.
I'll go there, he said.
Layna looked at him with a long, unreadable gaze. Are you sure you're ready to see what hides in the shadow? I've seen many things, he replied, and shadows don't scare me. The forest greeted him with the whisper of the wind and a deep silence. The dark trees stretched upward, their bare branches resembling claws scratching at the sky. Darian moved slowly, silently, like a hunter. He knew the creature was close. The scent, he smelled it before he saw it. Thick, metallic, pungent. Darian drew his sword. Then something shifted in the shadow. He turned, but all he saw was the darkness between the trees. The sound of footsteps. Quick, barely perceptible. Darian tensed. Come out. He spoke softly, but with challenge in his voice. Silence. Then the wind rustled the leaves, and for a moment, the witcher saw a dark silhouette standing between the trees. The eyes. They gleamed, reflecting the moonlight, and disappeared. The creature was gone. But Darian knew he was being watched, and the game was only beginning. Chapter 3: The Trap. The forest breathed. Deep within it, the roots stretched out like veins of an ancient creature, branches creaking in the night air, and something moved quietly through the grass, cautiously, without a sound. Dorian stood, gazing into the darkness. The pale moonlight brushed his face, casting silver upon the metal of his sword, but it couldn't penetrate further, into the place where the beast hid. The werewolf had gone, but Dorian knew it wouldn't be long before it returned. He tightened his grip on the hilt of his sword, his fingers tracing the old leather, feeling every notch left by years of use. He took a step forward, then another, trying to sense the presence of the creature. But the night mocked him with silence. So, the witcher decided to act. He returned to the village at dawn. The townsfolk were already waiting for him in the central square. The men carried pitchforks and torches. The women had fearful expressions, and the elderly wore looks of resignation in their eyes. They knew why he was there. Did you find it? Someone asked. No, but I know how to make it come. The men exchanged glances. Layna, standing a little farther off, stepped forward. You want to lure it out? Her voice was quiet, but tense. Yes. She paused, her gaze lingering on him, then looked around at the people. It's dangerous. Not more dangerous than waiting for it to come on its own, said the Witcher. I'll make it so it has no choice. The trap was simple. Dorian chose a small clearing in the forest where the trees parted, allowing space for maneuver. He left a bait, a piece of raw meat mixed with blood, the scent of which would carry through the area. Then, he carved magical symbols on the ground, ancient runes that absorbed the power of the moon. The werewolf would smell the scent. It would sense the magic, and it would come. Dorian waited. The first night passed in anticipation, the second night in unease. On the third, he heard a rustling. At first, it was a soft sound, like the wind moving the grass. Then it grew louder. Heavy footsteps. Dorian froze, listening. Something circled around, skirting the trap. The beast knew. Dorian tightened his grip on his sword and took a step forward. And then, a shadow darted from the darkness. He barely managed to block the strike. The claws scraped across the metal with a sharp sound. The creature was faster than he had expected. It leapt to the side, vanishing into the underbrush, and only its yellow eyes briefly flashed in the dark. The Witcher took a step, but then something tightened in his chest. A strange feeling. It was as though the creature's gaze had penetrated him, reading something inside, leaving a shadow of doubt. And then, the werewolf vanished again. Once more, Dorian exhaled and ran his hand across his face. This hunt was becoming too personal. Chapter 4. The Face in the Shadow. The fire in the hearth crackled, reflecting in the dark eyes of Layna. She sat across from the Witcher, arms crossed, silent. The tavern was quiet. The villagers had returned to their homes, locking their doors, as if the village had turned into a dead town. Dorian drank wine, but didn't taste it. One thought spun through his mind. This werewolf was no ordinary monster. It didn't charge blindly into battle, didn't behave like a wounded beast. No, it was playing. Did it leave again? Layna's voice was calm, but there was a barely perceptible note of worry in it. Dorian nodded. It knew I set a trap. The Witcher looked at Layna. It saw me, and I saw it. Layna turned her gaze away. What do you mean? Dorian leaned forward, his fingers clenching into a fist. This creature isn't just hunting. It's watching. I can feel it. Layna straightened, her face tense. You're speaking as if it is intelligent. The Witcher nodded slowly. It is intelligent, and perhaps it knows me better than I know it. That night, he went into the forest again. Cautious steps. The forest was silent. The wind didn't stir the leaves. The birds didn't sing. Everything stood still in anxious anticipation. Dorian stopped. He listened, and then a faint crack of a branch. He spun around sharply, but saw no one. His heart began to race. He could feel another presence. Come out, he said softly, but with challenge in his voice. Silence. Then, quiet rustling. A silhouette, tall, slender, almost human. But the eyes were wolfish. Dorian froze. The creature didn't rush to attack. It stood there, watching. And then the Witcher realized there was no savagery in those eyes. There was pain. And then the werewolf took a step back and disappeared into the shadows. But before it did, Dorian caught a glimpse of something he hadn't expected. A face. A face he knew. Layna's face. Chapter 5. The Last Secret. Dorian slowly lowered his sword. Everything inside him screamed that this was impossible, that he was mistaken, that eyes could deceive in the night. But his heart knew the truth. The werewolf he had been chasing for so long was Layna. The wind swept between the trees, rustling the leaves, as if laughing at him. The forest, this ancient silent witness, had known the truth long before he did. Dorian stood motionless. He couldn't kill her, but letting her live. When he returned to the village, Layna was already waiting for him. She stood by the well, her face shadowed. Only the moonlight illuminated the strands of her hair, turning them silver. "You saw me," she said. It wasn't a question. The Witcher stopped. "Why didn't you tell me?" Layna slowly inhaled. "Because I knew you were hunting me." There was no fear in her voice, only exhaustion. Dorian stepped closer. "Have you killed people?" She shook her head. "No, I held back as long as I could." The silence between them became almost palpable. "But one day, you won't hold back," Dorian said quietly. Layna closed her eyes. "That's why I have to leave." He looked at her. This girl he barely knew, but already felt something for that he couldn't explain. And he understood that he couldn't let her leave alone. "I'll go with you," he said. Layna flinched and looked at him with wide eyes. "Why?" "Because I know a way to lift the curse." She stared at him for a long moment, and then, in a whisper, she asked, "Are you sure?" Dorian nodded slowly. For the first time in a long while. Layna bit her lip, but a glimmer of hope flashed in her eyes. Hope he couldn't deny her. And that night, they left the village. Toward the curse. Toward the fate that could destroy them both, or save them. Chapter 6. The Road into Darkness. The forest greeted them in silence. Dorian walked ahead, carefully watching the road. Layna followed behind, wrapped in a dark cloak. Her breathing was steady, but the tension showed in every movement. They traveled north throughout the night, toward the Black Forest, an ancient place where, according to rumors, witches still lived, knowing the old magic. Dorian knew that if there was anywhere to lift a curse, it would be there. "Have you ever been there?" Layna broke the silence. "No, but I've heard stories." "Good ones." He smirked. If they were good, no one would call it the Black Forest. Layna lowered her head, lost in thought. What if it's a trap? What if the witches kill us? Then it will be the worst contract of my life, Dorian replied dryly. She shook her head. "You shouldn't come with me." "You've said that already." "I'm serious. If I turn again, you won't be able to stop me." Dorian glanced at her over his shoulder. "I will." She flinched, not from the cold, but from the way he said it. Too calmly, too confidently. By morning, the forest had grown denser. The trees closed in, leaving less and less space for light. The air here was different, thicker, soaked in something ancient. "We're almost there," Dorian said. Layna stopped. "What's wrong?" he asked, alert. She was staring into the depths of the forest. "There's something there." He immediately put his hand on the sword hilt. "Werewolves." "No, something else." At that moment, something shifted between the trees. Shadows. They moved strangely, as though something alive was floating. Dorian tensed. And then a voice. Gravelly, ancient, like leaves rustling underfoot. "Witcher, and the cursed one?" Layna went pale. "They know who we are," she whispered. Dorian tightened his grip on the sword. "Then let them show themselves." A figure stepped out of the shadows. Thin, dressed in black rags. Its face was hidden behind a bone mask. "You have come to lift the curse," the creature said. Layna grabbed the sleeve of the Witcher. "Can you help?" Dorian asked. The creature tilted its head. "Everything has a price." Dorian felt his heart tighten. He knew the price would be high, but was he ready to pay it? Chapter 7. The Price of the Curse. The figure in the mask stood still, its silhouette blending into the forest, merging with the shadows. Darian tightened his grip on the sword, feeling the air around him grow heavier, more saturated, as though the forest itself was holding its breath in anticipation of the answer. Layna stepped forward. "What price do you want?" Her voice was firm, but tension lingered in it. The creature slowly turned its head, its empty eye sockets beneath the mask seeming to bore into her. "A life for a life," it whispered. Darian raised his sword sharply. "What does that mean?" The figure did not move. The curse cannot be lifted without a sacrifice. It was created with blood and pain. It can only be destroyed in the same way. Layna swallowed. "Whose life?" The creature slowly stretched out its bony hand and touched her chest with its fingertips. "Yours." Silence fell between them, heavy as a stone. "No," Darian said. The figure turned to him. "Then let it be his life." Layna spun around quickly. Darian did not move. He just stared into the empty eye sockets, while thoughts rushed through his head. A life for a life. So, there was no other way? Layna clenched her fists. "There must be another way." The creature spoke again. "There is, but it is more difficult." "What is it?" Darian asked. The figure raised its head, and its voice became strangely deep. "Obtain wolf's blood yourself." The word struck him like a blade across the skin. "You want me to become one?" "A wolf will not kill another wolf. Only blood similar to its curse can separate it." Layna grabbed his arm. Darian, no, he remained silent. The curse. A werewolf. To become a monster. Was he ready to go through with it for her? Or was the price still too high? Chapter 8. The Witcher's Choice. The forest held its breath, as if it was waiting for an answer. Darian felt Layna's gaze burning through him. There was pleading in her eyes.
Fear. Hope.
Everything mixed into one. "You don't have to do this," she whispered. But he knew he had no choice. He had hunted her, chased her, trying to kill her. But now he was ready to sacrifice himself for her salvation. The figure in the mask waited patiently. Darian took a step forward. "What do I need to do?" Layna gasped, her fingers trembling as they clenched into fists. "Darian, quiet," he said, not looking back. The figure in the mask extended its hand. "You must taste her blood, and let the moon take you." Darian nodded slowly. He removed his glove, exposing his wrist. Layna stood, biting her lip, tears filling her eyes. "Don't, please." Darian caught her hand and squeezed gently. "I'm a witcher, and I've always known that darkness awaited me in the end." She looked at him as if she wanted to say something, but there were no words, only despair. The blade slipped across her skin. A drop of blood fell onto his palm, hot, dark red. Darian looked at her and brought it to his lips. The taste of metal, bitterness, something wild, unfathomable. And then pain. A dull, burning pain piercing his bones. He staggered, falling to his knees. Somewhere in the distance, Layna screamed. The forest spun, the sky darkened, the earth trembled. Darian felt his body change. Blood surged, his breath became ragged, and an animal fire spread within him. He screamed, but the voice was no longer his. And the moon, hidden behind clouds, finally illuminated his new form. Chapter 9. The Face of the Beast. The forest shuddered. A wild, agonizing roar hung in the air. It was filled with pain, fury, and something else, something primal, not human. Darian fell to all fours, feeling his body break, his bones reshaping, the beastly essence forcefully breaking through. His fingers lengthened, turning into claws. His skin burned with fire, his hair grew long, turning into thick fur. His heart beat at an unnatural speed, pushing new, altered blood through his veins. He lifted his head, but the world no longer looked the same. Sharper.
Clearer.
Every scent became a story, every sound, a song of the night. And in this symphony of horror and transformation, there she was, Layna. She stood before him, her eyes wide open, but not from fear, from recognition. She knew this path. She had walked it once. Darian, her voice trembled. He took a step toward her, but his body no longer obeyed familiar movements. He was a wolf, a beast, and the instinct screamed, run, hunt, live. But among them, another feeling broke through, one that lived deeper than magic, one that neither blood nor curse could change.
Love.
He froze, his chest heaving, and then Layna slowly, cautiously, stepped forward. She extended her hand. You'll make it. I'm with you. Darian looked at her, through the pain, through the darkness, and made his choice. Chapter 10. The Last Threshold. The forest was still. The night pressed down on the ground, as if afraid to make an unnecessary breath. Darian felt his muscles tremble, a new, unknown force spreading through his body. He hadn't fully realized who he was now. A man? A beast? Or something in between, existing in the space between two worlds? Layna stood before him, her hand still outstretched, but now there was caution in her eyes. She could see how his chest rose and fell heavily, how the yellow wolf's eyes struggled between two forces. Darian looked at her. He could run, disappear into the forest, become a wild shadow among the trees. He could give in to the instincts now ringing in his head, calling him to the moon, to the hunt, to blood. But he did not move, because her voice broke through that call. I am with you, she said again, quieter but firmer. And her words became an anchor. Darian clenched his fists, feeling his claws dig into his palms. He closed his eyes, exhaling. Somewhere deep inside, the beast raged, howling and tearing to break free, demanding submission. But he was not a slave to the curse. He was a witcher, and he subdued the darkness within himself. When Darian opened his eyes again, the golden glow of wolfish nature still burned in them, but his mind remained clear. Layna exhaled shakily. You did it, her voice trembled. He slowly stepped toward her, feeling his muscles ache from the ordeal. Not completely yet, he answered, but I'm holding on. Layna raised her hand and touched his face. He flinched as her fingers passed over his cheek, across the new, slightly rougher skin. It's warm, she whispered. He covered her hand with his own. Layna, his voice was deeper than before. We have to go further. She nodded. Ahead of them lay not just salvation. Ahead of them lay the truth. Chapter 11. Merciless Shadows. The darkness of the forest thickened like dense fog, and with every step, they delved deeper into the unknown, every tree, every branch seeming hostile. Layna and Darian stood before a stone altar, surrounded by ancient ruins, and before them stood a figure in a bone mask, cold and indifferent. The fog coiled around its form, making it even more mystical and terrifying. This creature was not just a guardian. It was part of this place, part of the magic that hid in the forest's shadow. Layna felt her heart tighten, a heaviness filling her chest. They hadn't come here just to find answers. They had come to defeat the curse that had been dragging her into the shadow, to stop what had been destroying their destinies. And now, standing before this creature, she felt it all becoming real. Too real. Darian, standing beside her, felt the same chill that enveloped them both. There was no fear in his eyes, only resolve. He was ready to fight, but now, standing before this mysterious guardian, it was hard to understand what exactly they needed to do to move forward. The creature in the bone mask did not move. Its eyes, two hollow voids, seemed more profound with every passing second. Layna couldn't shake the feeling that this creature wasn't just looking at them, It was seeing through them, and in its gaze, there was neither compassion nor regret. Only cold, impartial magic that remained unchanged despite everything. Unable to endure the silence any longer, Layna took a step forward. Her voice was firm, though a torrent of emotions raged inside her. "We came to lift the curse. What do we do next?" she asked, trying not to reveal the anxiety that gripped her. Darian nodded silently, supporting her words. He was with her, and they both understood that the path they had chosen was not just dangerous. It was a path that determined their fate. The creature in the bone mask finally raised one hand slowly, as if time here followed its own laws. Then, glancing at both of them, it spoke. Its voice was quiet but incredibly commanding, as if it was omnipresent, penetrating to the very soul. "You did not come simply to lift the curse. You came to confront what lies hidden within you. You must undergo 3 trials. Each one will reveal to you something you are not ready to see. Only those who can overcome their fears, their darkness, will find freedom." Layna felt something inside her tighten. 3 trials. It was more than they had expected. The fact that the creature spoke so confidently, with each step resonating in their hearts, only deepened their unease. "What trials?" Darian asked, his voice low and tense. The creature did not answer immediately. It raised its hand and pointed to the altar, the ancient stone adorned with symbols and patterns that seemed both familiar and alien. The stone was covered in moss and dusted with those same marks, which they felt might hold meaning. Perhaps the very magic of this place was contained in them. "The first trial is the trial of will," the creature said, and the shadow cast by the bone mask seemed to darken even further. "You will pass through a labyrinth of the mind. There will be no physical barriers, but every step you take will challenge your choices. In this labyrinth, all your fears, doubts, regrets will try to pull you back. If you cannot stand firm, if even one of you gives in, you will remain here forever." Layna felt her hands tremble, her heart pounding faster. This was not just a trial of strength. It was a trial of their minds, their wills. And if they did not endure, if they failed, they would remain in this place forever. But they could not retreat.
Not now.
"The second trial is the trial of the heart," the voice continued, now sounding even less of this world. "You will face what you fear the most, that which makes your heart freeze and your soul scream. Only the one who conquers this fear can move forward." Layna knew what her greatest fear was: losing Darian. Losing him in this world where they had already faced so many dangers. But this fear was nothing compared to what lay ahead. "And the third," Darian spoke, his voice now steady despite the fear. The creature slowly lifted its head, and the shadow of the bone mask swallowed everything around them. "The last trial is the trial of the soul. You must find that part of yourself you would never want to lose. And only by giving it up will you be able to defeat the curse. But be careful. What you love the most may be what breaks you." Layna did not believe these words at first, but something inside her, something deep and almost imperceptible, made her shudder. Was Darian the one she would have to lose? Or would they both lose what mattered most to them? The creature in the bone mask stepped back, and the fog swallowed it once more, leaving Layna and Darian alone with their fears and doubts. Layna looked at Darian. He stood beside her, and his eyes gleamed with determination. They could not retreat. They had not come here for a simple answer. They had come here to fight. And despite the 3 trials ahead, they knew. They were ready. "We are ready," Darian said, and in his voice was the firmness that gave them strength. They took the first step. Chapter 12. Bloody Price. The fog, as if sensing the strength of their resolve, spread across the ground, carrying away the last moments of calm. Darian and Layna's steps were in sync, like 2 halves of one whole, but the silence in their hearts did not disappear. Each of them felt the weight of what they had been forced to endure. The ancient forest, filled with magic and ancient forces, was ready to test them, but they didn't know what else lay hidden behind this dark veil. Layna walked beside him, her gaze focused, but inside her soul, a storm raged. She tried to find answers to the questions that had haunted her ever since Darian had arrived in this place. A werewolf. She knew that his blood, mixed with hers, had left marks that would probably never fade. He had become a part of her world, just as she had become part of his.
But why?
For what purpose? When the fog began to thin, Darian suddenly stopped. His gaze became heavy, filled with questions. He turned to her, his face showing confusion and concern. "Layna," he said softly, his voice ragged. "I don't understand. Why did this creature make me taste your blood? Why did I become a werewolf?" Layna clenched her fists, feeling everything inside her tense. This question had not given her peace since their encounter with this creature. She thought she knew the answer, but now, hearing it from Darian, everything seemed even more confusing. "I don't know," she replied, her voice soft but determined. "But maybe it's part of what we need to understand." Darian nodded silently, but it was clear how hard this was for him. He was a warrior, not someone accustomed to such questions. But fate had forced him to walk this path. They continued walking, and no matter how hard they tried to reach their goal, doubt lingered in their hearts. Why so many trials? Why was everything so complicated? Finally, they arrived at a small clearing where an old stone stood in the center, covered with strange runes. Layna felt the magic flowing around them, becoming even more palpable. As they stepped closer, they were suddenly overwhelmed by the feeling that something ancient, something primal, was watching them. The creature, the very same guardian in the bone mask, appeared before them again, as if materializing from the shadow itself. It stared at them, its empty eye sockets devoid of fear or regret. It was merely an observer, following the ancient spell. "You have come to face the trials," it said, its voice quiet but authoritative. "But there is something you must know before you continue." Layna and Darian stopped, daring not take another step. Silence hung in the air, and the creature seemed ready to explain what they still didn't understand. "To lift the curse, you must face 3 trials. But to pass them, both of you must be werewolves." It looked at Darian, and there was a hidden irony in its voice. "Darian, you have tasted Layna's blood, and now, like her, you become part of what has been considered a curse for centuries. But it is this curse you must embrace in order to pass the trials. Only in this state can you weaken the magic that holds you and this forest." Layna gasped, her heart freezing in shock. What had seemed like a curse was actually the key to their salvation. She felt a cold shiver run through her body, and Darian's expression grew increasingly tense. "So," Darian said, his voice growing harder, "we both must be werewolves to pass the trials? But what does that give us? Why couldn't we just stay who we were before?" The creature in the bone mask tilted its head in a strange gesture, and its shadow dissolved into the air, as though it had become part of the night. "Because your curse is your strength. Only by becoming part of what you fear will you be able to defeat what hides in the depths of these forests and in your souls. The curse is not a punishment. It is an opportunity for you to rid yourselves of what keeps you in the dark, to face the trials, to walk a path where you will become who you have always been, strong, full of power, and ready to embrace your fate. But only if you agree to accept your new self." Layna felt her gaze shift to Darian. She saw the question in his eyes, which had now become her own. He was with her, and she was with him. Together, they could find their way, despite this curse. "And if we pass all 3 trials?" she asked, her voice soft but confident. The creature was silent for a moment, and something like a spark of human understanding flickered in its eyes. If you pass all 3 trials, the curse will be lifted. But remember, not everything is as simple as it seems. When you become who you are meant to be, you will have to face the shadows hidden within your souls. And when you walk this path, there will be no turning back. Silence once again swallowed the space around them. Layna and Darian stood, breathing the heavy air. Everything they knew was now in question. But they couldn't stop. They knew that their fate was not just a battle against external enemies. It was a battle with their own demons. And for that, they needed to become who they truly were. Werewolves. Chapter 13. Crossing Through the Shadows. The darkness in the forest held its ground. The further Layna and Darian walked, the denser the web of magic and ancient spells became, wrapping around their bodies and souls. Each step echoed in the silence, and more, they felt the forest closing in around them, as though something hidden and unknown was watching their every move. When they reached the ancient stone circle that marked the beginning of the first trial, the air grew heavy, as if the very molecules had absorbed fear. They stood on the edge of something they couldn't fully understand. Layna felt her heart race, and her breathing became labored. This was not just a trial of the body. It was a trial of will, of consciousness, and even of what they considered to be truth. The creature in the bone mask disappeared, but its words continued to ring in their heads like an inevitable sentence. The trials await you. Be ready for what will be revealed. Darian turned to her, and their eyes met. Layna, despite everything they had been through, still felt his presence beside her, his strength becoming her support. This was what they were ready to overcome together. Ready? He asked, his voice soft, but there was firmness in it. Layna nodded without saying a word. In her chest, she felt the sense that they were standing on the edge of a precipice, and now they had to step into the darkness, from which there would be no return. And so, they stepped into the stone circle, which began with mysterious symbols. These symbols began to glow, and magic enveloped them. Layna felt her body grow heavy, as if each moment was draining her strength. The first trial, the trial of the mind. The walls of the circle began to fade, and they found themselves in a desert that stretched to the horizon. The scorching sun burned, and the air was filled with dryness. Layna looked at Darian, her heart racing. He was there, but something was wrong. His face distorted, as though he was not real. Darian, she called, but her voice was swallowed by this strange world. He turned to her, but it was not Darian. It was his form, but not his essence. Layna took a step back. "You can't be him," she said, her voice trembling with fear. The creature in his guise smiled, and its eyes became empty, like bottomless pits. It spoke in a cold, eerie voice. "You don't know who he truly is. You don't know what you are. You fear losing him, but in truth, you are unsure." Layna's heart clenched. This was what she feared, doubt. Doubt in her feelings. Doubt in their fate. She couldn't let this fear break her.
Not now.
She took a deep breath and closed her eyes, letting go of the thoughts that tormented her. When she opened them again, the Real Darian stood before her. He was beside her, as strong and determined as before. "We will get through this," she said, her voice firm. They were back in the stone circle. But the trial was not over. Layna knew that more struggles lay ahead. The second trial, the trial of the heart. They found themselves in a forest, but it was not the forest they had been in. The trees were taller, their branches twisting into strange shapes, and the air was filled with a hushed whisper. Layna felt her heart race, and pain began to boil in her chest. Her eyes fell to the ground, and before her appeared the form of an old woman. It was her mother, the one who had left so early. She stood before her, with a sad smile and eyes full of regret. "You couldn't save me," her mother said. "You couldn't be strong like me. You were always afraid to be yourself." Layna felt the bitter sting of guilt overwhelm her, the pain that had tormented her ever since she lost her. She was falling into this world where the past and the present intertwined into one. But then she remembered. She remembered how many times she had relived this in her soul. She realized that the past had no power over her. She was not just a daughter. She was herself, and in this lay her strength. She stepped toward her mother and said, "I didn't lose you. I became strong." And her mother vanished, dissolving into the air. When Layna opened her eyes again, the forest was normal, and the fog had lifted. They stood next to Darian again. She felt her soul release the burden. The third trial, the trial of the soul. They stood at the edge of an abyss, before them a chasm that could swallow them without a trace. Layna stood on the edge, her body trembling from the magic that hung in the air. "You must give up what you love the most," said a voice emanating from the abyss itself. Layna looked at Darian. She could stay here, on the edge, with him, or make a choice that might shatter her. She was ready to give everything, but she knew the most important thing was to remain herself, not losing her strength and love. She approached the edge, looked into the abyss, and threw her fears into it. And only then, when she allowed herself to be real, did she feel the magic weaken. And when the darkness cleared, they were back in the same stone circle. The creature in the bone mask appeared before them again, and in its eyes was something that could be understanding. "You have passed the trials," it said, its voice devoid of malice or irony. "Only respect. Now you are ready." Layna and Darian stood, feeling how they had changed. Their souls had become stronger. They had gone through everything, the fears, the pain, the darkness. And now, as they stood by each other, they knew that something even more important awaited them. Chapter 14, The Final Step and Opened Eyes. The sunset light, soft and warm, enveloped them as Layna and Darian stood at the edge of the ancient forest. The magic that had been lingering around them gradually quieted, its tension melting away, and with every step they took, their bodies were increasingly freed from what had bound their souls. The curse that had held them captive for so long was now lifted. Peace, like an invisible veil, wrapped around their hearts. Darian stood beside her, his gaze directed forward, into the distance that lay hidden beyond the horizon. His breathing was steady and calm. He felt freer than ever before, and all of this was thanks to Layna, his companion, who had gone through all these trials alongside him. But inside him, the echoes of the events they had survived still resonated. The werewolf, the power that gave a sense of dominance, yet also unbearable slavery. He turned to Layna, and in his eyes was a moment of realization. He began softly, his voice unusually gentle. "For a moment, I even liked being a werewolf. The power that fills your body, as though you could conquer the world. But it's slavery, Layna. You are a slave to that power, and there's no true freedom unless you rid yourself of it." Layna listened in silence, her gaze thoughtful, as if trying to understand exactly what he meant. She remembered the nights when, as a werewolf, her body seemed filled with wild energy. But with each transformation came the realization that this power controlled her, stole her future, making her unfree. "We managed to rid ourselves of it," Layna said, her voice soft but confident. "We broke the curse. We're free now." She took a step toward him, and their eyes met. In her gaze was a light that reflected all the strength that remained in them after all their trials. They had gone through fears and pains, through the darkest parts of their being. And now, they were together, free, without the curse, without the weight. Darian felt something stir inside his heart, a feeling that had never left him since the beginning of their journey. It was not just attachment. It was a strength born in their shared trials, in struggle and mutual understanding. He felt that with her, he was alive, real, with himself. "You're right," he said, his words filled with quiet tenderness. "All this time, I thought I was doomed to be alone, but now that we've broken the curse, I understand that the real path is to be with you, to be by your side." He stepped closer to her, his hand gently brushing her face, and Layna felt the warmth of his touch spread across her skin. She pressed her palm to his, and her heart beat faster. These words were more than just a confession. It was a new beginning for both of them. Darian lowered his head and kissed her softly. This kiss not only a farewell to the curse, but also a promise that their future would be in their hands. It was the moment when all their struggle found meaning, when they both realized that what mattered most was being together. And then, as their lips met in this final kiss, the forest seemed to retreat, leaving them in peace. The magic faded away, like evening mist dissolving into the air. Layna felt how, in her body, in her soul, it became easier. All the fears and torments that had plagued her disappeared. "Let's go," Darian said, pulling away from her. "To the village. A new day awaits us there, and we can start over." They walked together, hand in hand, through the forest, which no longer seemed so dark. A light breeze tousled their hair, and in its breath was the freshness of a new beginning. There was no more shadow of the curse in their lives, no pain, no fear. They were free. When they emerged at the forest's edge and saw the village, their gaze turned toward the horizon, where the sun was setting. In the evening shadow, lit by the last rays of the sunset, they knew that now their path was only their own. And despite everything they had been through, they were together. And that was enough to believe in a miracle, to believe in love, in a strength that could conquer anything. Chapter 15. The Quiet Return. The village lay before them, bathed in the soft glow of twilight. It was a peaceful evening, the kind that seemed to slow time itself, as if the world, for just a moment, had paused to exhale. The streets were empty, save for the occasional rustle of the wind through the trees, and the houses stood like silent sentinels, their windows darkened, and doors shut tight against the cool night air. Darian and Layna walked side by side, the weight of their journey still lingering between them, but now softened by the relief of freedom. The curse was broken, their struggles behind them, but the quiet of the village felt almost foreign, a reminder that not all battles were fought with swords or magic. Some wars were fought in the hearts and minds of those around them. As they entered the village square, the few villagers who remained outside caught sight of them. The older ones, their faces lined with years of experience, glanced at Darian with a mixture of respect and caution, for his reputation had preceded him. He was a witcher, feared and revered in equal measure, known for his skill and his unyielding pursuit of monsters. But there was something about him now, something different, a quiet change that only those who had seen him before could recognize. His eyes were softer, his movements slower, as if the weight of his past had been lifted, if only slightly. They approached the small inn where Darian had been staying, and the innkeeper, an older man with a thick gray beard, stepped out to greet them. His face was tight with apprehension, but his eyes flickered with a hint of gratitude. "Well met," the innkeeper said, his voice rough but sincere. "We owe you thanks, Darian. You did what we could not. You rid us of the beast that plagued our village." He stepped forward and handed Darian a small pouch of coin, the reward for his service. "Your payment as promised." Darian took the pouch, his fingers brushing against the smooth leather, but he didn't make a move to open it. He nodded in acknowledgement, his gaze scanning the quiet faces around him. The villagers were watching him with the same wariness that they had shown when he first arrived, a silent understanding that, while the threat of the werewolf had passed, the shadow of his own presence remained. "Thank you," Darian said simply, his voice carrying a quiet sincerity. "It was my duty." Layna, standing by his side, said nothing. Her presence was almost invisible in the growing darkness, her movements quiet and unassuming. She kept her head slightly lowered, her eyes on the ground as if she preferred not to draw attention to herself. She had learned over the years to remain in the background, to avoid the curious gazes of others. Her past, her curse, was no longer hers to carry, but the weight of it still lingered, and she was content to let the villagers see her only as a companion to the Witcher, nothing more. As they moved away from the inn, Darian could feel the eyes of the villagers following them. They whispered in hushed tones, casting furtive glances in their direction. Layna could sense the tension in the air, the fear that still gripped the village despite the werewolf's disappearance. It was not just fear of Darian, it was fear of the unknown, of the things that could not be explained or understood. But Layna knew better than to react. She had been through too much to care for the judgment of those who did not know her story. She would not let their whispers pierce her, not when she had already faced the greatest battle of all and emerged victorious. Darian's thoughts mirrored hers, but his nature, more attuned to the weight of others' perceptions, could not shake the unease that the villagers felt. He had seen it before, the way people treated the unknown, the fear of the monster that had once been among them, even if that monster had been slain. "They'll get used to it," Layna said softly, her voice barely above a whisper, as she glanced up at him. "They will forget the wolf, and remember the man." Darian nodded, his gaze still distant. He knew she was right. Over time, the villagers would move on, their fear would fade, and life would return to its normal rhythm. The monster was gone, but what remained was the memory of what had happened and the uneasy peace that followed in its wake. They continued down the winding path that led to the edge of the village, their footsteps steady and resolute. The sounds of the village began to fade behind them, replaced by the soft rustling of the forest around them. Layna walked with a calm grace, her presence now something that blended into the quiet evening, unnoticed by all but Darian, who could not help but steal glances at her from time to time. They didn't need words, not anymore. The bond they shared was stronger than any curse, deeper than any magic. It was a silent understanding that had been forged through their trials, their victories, and their shared losses. The village was behind them now, its secrets and its shadows left to linger in the past. Ahead of them, the forest stretched out, its ancient trees whispering tales of those who had walked these paths long before them. It was a new beginning, not just for them, but for all those whose lives had been touched by the curse. And as they walked into the night, the first stars of the evening began to twinkle above, a reminder that even in the darkest of times, there was always light to guide them forward. The future was uncertain, but they would face it together, side by side. The werewolf was gone. The curse had been broken. And now, only the open road lay ahead.